In this video I'm showing how I fixed an issue on a 2012 Ford Focus where the windshield wipers turned themselves on one day and would not turn off. This is my wife's car, and she called me one night when she was driving home and said that the windshield wipers had just randomly turned on when she was going down the road. And none of the easy stuff was fixing it, such as turning the windshield wipers on and off and turning the car on and off. And sure enough, when I got around to looking at it 6 months later, I found that the windshield wipers were indeed not responding to the switch. And the real spooky part was that they weren't responding to the key either. I could actually turn the vehicle completely off and the windshield wipers would still run. And it wasn't until I popped the hood and disconnected one of the battery terminals that the windshield wipers finally stopped running. Luckily, this problem ended up being pretty easy and relatively cheap to fix, and I'll show how I did that now. It was either total dumb luck or brilliance that led Ford to also make the ST version of this car, and that tends to attract a more mechanically inclined, enthusiast type crowd that figures out how to fix stupid problems like this one, and they share it on forums so that clueless bumpkins like myself can figure out how to fix it too. I'll leave a link in the description to the forum post where I found the answer if you're interested in reading through the technical explanation. My takeaway from it though was that this problem can be caused by the negative battery terminal and the battery voltage sensor getting corroded and all jabronied up and eventually causing a voltage leak that apparently spills over to the windshield wipers. When I got the cover off of the battery and took a look at the negative terminal, I could see that it was definitely ate up with corrosion. And it became obvious fairly quickly that I wasn't going to be able to get the terminal off of the post without pulling the battery out first. It's been several years since I replaced this, but this is one of the many things I hate about this car. I didn't do a great job capturing it on video, but while I was pulling the battery out, the cable for the current sensor was so corroded that it just sort of snapped off. So you can see this hole here where it used to be. I had to take a screwdriver and a hammer and tap on the negative terminal to break it loose, and then I was able to disconnect it from the battery and set that aside. And just assessing the damage here, you can see that the corrosion on the negative terminal is pretty bad, and this little plug for the current sensor was unusable as well. So these two parts made up a shopping list for the repairs. I got the negative battery terminal off of Amazon. The replacement plug and pigtails for the current sensor was a little more difficult to find, so I had to go out to eBay for that one. And I'll leave links down below in the description for the part numbers that I used. Since the negative cable had to go, I went ahead and removed it with a socket wrench. And the plug for the current sensor was in too bad a shape to do anything with, so I went ahead and cut it off with a pair of snips. This is the replacement negative battery cable with the current sensor, and you can see it looks mostly identical to the one we're replacing. And this is the replacement plug and pigtails for the current sensor. It's kind of a kit, and it comes with the heat shrink that you need after you splice the cables together. My biggest fear was that I ordered the wrong parts and was going to have to wait another week, but everything connected fine. First I pulled some of the cabling out of the conduit, and then I stripped a little bit off of the end to expose some wiring. The directions recommended staggering the splices, so I cut a little bit extra off of one of the wires, and then I stripped some insulation off the end of this one as well, and fanned out the wiring so that I could twist it together with the wiring from the replacement plug. When I looked at the plug for the old negative cable, the white wire was on the top and the gray one was on the bottom, so my plan was to connect the replacement plug in that same orientation. The wires for the replacement plug are pretty long, so I cut off some of the extra and then stripped the ends off. Then I fanned them out a little bit so that I could twist them together with the wiring to the car. And this is where I made a mistake. Remember those little heat shrinks from earlier? Yeah, I forgot to put those on the first time. So I proceeded to twist the wiring together, apply flux, and solder not one but both cables together before realizing that I didn't have the heat shrink on. And I was sad. I actually did a good job soldering by my standards. But since I had no way to put the heat shrink on at this point, I decided to just cut the ends off and do the whole thing again. There's even less here to see the second go around, so I'll kind of speed through this. I'm just stripping the ends of the wires for the car side, stripping the ends of the wires for the replacement plug side, remembering to actually put the heat shrink on this time, twisting the wires together, applying flux, and doing an amateurish job at soldering. Then I position the heat shrink over the solder and I use the heat gun to shrink it in place. And repeated those steps for the other wire as well. And this is what the finished product looked like with the replacement plug installed. Then I stuffed the wiring back down into the conduit before moving on to the negative terminal. This part's easy. I just put the cable back in the way the old one was and tightened it down with my ratchet. I connected the new plug to the new sensor and sat it aside while I reinstalled the battery. Then I put the negative terminal on and tightened it down, and reconnected the positive terminal as well. Once I had my mess cleaned up off the windshield, I was able to test it out. It was a pretty good sign when the windshield wipers didn't start once the battery was reconnected. When I turned the ignition on, the windshield wipers still didn't start, which was good. And when I flipped through the different windshield wiper settings, it seemed to respond correctly each time, which was also good. A few more quick things here before calling it quits. I also added some conduit to the cabling for the replacement plug just so it wouldn't be exposed. I reinstalled the hold down clamp for the battery and tightened the nuts down. And finally I put the plastic covers back on. And that's about all there is to it, bud. I hope this information is useful if you also have a piece of junk Focus with haunted windshield wipers. Hit like if this was helpful, and thanks for watching.